Hi, Jonathan, if you can hear me, I just sent you an invite to video. You want to click on the accept link for video. I'm going to invite you again. So you want to click on that accept link and then we'll have you on stage.
Hey, looking for that video invite. Apologies.
Okay, no problem. Let me try it again. It should come up as a pop-up on your Fireside app. There you are. Perfect. Okay, can you hear me okay? Jonathan, thank you so much for being here today. This is a special edition of Crypto Defined. Crypto Defined is put out by TruthDAO, one of the first Web3 nonpartisan, unbiased news organizations. You can find more about us at truthdao.xyz, and we will have a recap of our interview with Jonathan on truthdao.news in coming days. Now, Jonathan Wu, he is head of growth. He's growth at Aztec Network, which is basically head of marketing. And Jonathan will tell us a little bit about what Aztec Network is. But the reason why he is our special guest here today is he's been one of the leading voices making sense of what is happening with Celsius. It's a DeFi lender that is basically melting down, and the developments have been happening so rapidly that it's been hard to comprehend what is going on. Jonathan has been one of the leading voices on Twitter and in social media. He also has a newsletter called 40IQ. His Twitter handle is John Wu and _. Correct, John?
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for having me, Kathy.
Thank you, John. So you publish a very helpful primer on Twitter about what's going on with Celsius. Can you tell us, just in plain terms, what is happening? It seems like it's gone from 0 to 180 in within a few days. What's happening with Celsius, and why are the crypto markets tanking with it?
Yeah, so Celsius was essentially a fintech wrapper for DeFi. Some people compare it to a bank. I compared it in my thread to Vanguard. I would say other people have compared it to a broker-dealer like the failed MF Global from the last financial crisis. really, you can think of it as just an intermediary between retail users and crypto investors and actual decentralized finance services. So they never purported to actually offer decentralized finance services, but merely a centralized gateway. And the important thing about Celsius was they collected user deposits in investor funds and then invested those on users and investors' behalf. And so what happened is they pursued a bunch of highly illiquid strategies, including staking ETH and purchasing liquid staking derivatives like STETH. Now, doing such things ensures that investor capital was locked up for an indeterminate amount of time. Because Ethereum 2 has not actually merged, the beacon chain has not merged and brought Ethereum into a proof of stake system, the ETH that is committed and staked in the beacon chain will likely not be unlocked for at least 1 year. Now, what initiated the withdrawal freeze was a large number of investors listening to some of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, listening to some of that FUD that has been published on Twitter and other sources over the course of the last couple of weeks, and reacting by withdrawing funds. Now, that withdrawal of funds potentially could have revealed Celsius's insolvent or illiquid position. Now, of course, that is conjecture on the part of the public, including myself, but it seems to indicate that Celsius did not want a bank run, did not want total withdrawal.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, a lot of great information there. If we could back up a little bit, before the Celsius started melting down, just less than 24 hours before, the founder, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Machinsky, if that's correct, had tweeted at a detractor on Twitter and said that no one is unable to get their money out, and basically implied that everything was okay. So what is going on there, John? I mean, was everything okay at that point, and did it just spiral downhill, or is that impossible that everything was okay and he was just trying to sow confidence into the market? What are your thoughts on that?
Again, this is pure conjecture. We can't possibly know. And if the court system gets involved, if regulators get involved, I'm sure this story will unfold. I would say that the consensus is that he was trying to prop up confidence, that he was trying to tell investors not to withdraw in case a withdrawal would unveil just how insolvent they really were. And to be really clear, I don't necessarily think Celsius is not good for all user deposits. Like I said, ETH that's staked in the beacon chain will eventually be unlocked and returned to anyone who staked it to begin with. But that could take 12 months. It could take 18 months. The Ethereum community, which I'm a part of, has been talking about a merge or a transition to proof of stake since 2017. And so these technical improvements to underlying protocols take a long time to execute. I want to be clear that this was not a failure of STETH, which is a Lido protocol product. This was not a failure of the Ethereum network. This was not a failure of the Ether token, but it was a decision made by a broker-dealer, made by an asset manager to invest in an illiquid asset and now struggling to return the underlying back.
Now, you made the distinction, liquid staked ether. For those who don't know what that is, could you explain that a little and why that's important? Because I believe that with the liquid staked ether, that's why they were able to offer rates of, I think they were offering about 8%. Is that correct, John? So
Yeah,
why
that's correct.
is that? What is liquid staked ether? Why is it important in this equation?
Liquid staked ETH is a product that is offered by a decentralized protocol called Lido Finance. Now, Lido, essentially what they do is offer users a service where they stake ETH on your behalf. Now, staking ETH is complicated for two reasons. Number one, in order to run a staking node, you need 32 ETH, and that's a round number. So you need exactly 32 Ether, which by today's pricing is something like $45,000. So number one, there's a minimum capital requirement for staking. And number two, you have to run actual staking infrastructure. Now, most retail investors have no interest or frankly enough Ether to be able to run staking services on their own. And so Lido's service is you can deposit an arbitrary amount of Ether they will stake it on your behalf and then issue you a staking derivative, which they called liquid staked Ether. And that is essentially an IOU. That is something that says you've got ETH staked with us, and any earnings we make on our ETH will be reflected in your IOU, your derivative coupons balance. Now, because it is a liquid representation of staked Ether, by holding on to that token, you actually gain all the staking yields of Ether. But on top of that, because it's a fungible token, you can then redeposit it, rehypothecate it to get additional yield on top.
So was that a mistake for them to use liquid staked ETH in basically their business model?
Again, I want to underscore that there's nothing dangerous about purchasing or using liquid staked ETH. In fact, us at Aztec, we are a privacy network. We partner with Lido and think that they're one of the most innovative and secure protocols in DeFi. Not financial advice, of course. That being said, Celsius made a specific promise that in their marketing copy to users, which is that they may withdraw the underlying Ether at any time. Liquid staked Ether is a different token. It is not Ether. It is the promise of Ether at a future date. And so for Celsius to market that they had liquid reserves of Ether and then to deposit that Ether and swap it for a staking derivative, which cannot be redeemed for Ether for a long period of time, therein perhaps.
Okay, so that's a very important distinction. Thank you for making that. So again, as John mentioned, it's not the liquid staked Ether, but basically the way it was used and the promises that were made around it. Correct, John? For those of you just joining us, we have with us John Wu. He is growth, which is basically head of marketing at Aztec Network. And he is at John Wu _ on Twitter. He has a 40 IQ newsletter. If you would like to ask a question of John, what you want to do is hit the bottom right of your screen. There's a react button. You're going to tap an emoji and type your question in. I know a few of you have already submitted questions, so we will get to that in a minute. So John, let's continue here. So in terms of the Luna Terra meltdown, that was about a month ago. And since the Luna Terra meltdown, people have been wondering about what is the next shoe that will fall? Is there a next shoe that will fall? One of the things that was interesting about Luna Terra that there's also link here with Celsius is the high returns it promised. And some people have linked the high returns to part of the reason why there was a collapse. So could you talk to us about the similarities between the two? And do you think those high returns in both cases were at least partly responsible for what's happening with them today?
Yeah, so there are actually remarkably few tactical differences in the way these two protocols seem to have let retail investors down. One was an algorithmic stablecoin, which had a highly circular design by nature, and the failure mode was mass redemptions. Now, similarly here, you might say mass redemptions were the cause, but in reality, there was no recursive or circular design in Celsius's application. Celsius's financial product essentially was someone sitting in an office somewhere in a centralized, fintech app office making an asset management decision. And so I could say for Celsius that they made some poor decisions around risk management and the amount of liquidity that they had on hand. Whereas I would say a mistake, if you can call it that, for Terra was this highly circular design. It's very hard to draw parallels between the two because Terra was a nominally decentralized stablecoin built on a layer 1 network. Celsius is a centralized fintech app that looks much more like a Web 2 wrapper for DeFi. What I will say, and I want to underscore, one deep similarity between both protocols was that there was a centralized body making policy and decisions on behalf of users and retail investors. And so in Celsius's case, there was presumably a risk management team, there was a lending team, there was a DeFi strategy team who deemed it appropriate to lock user ETH funds in STETH and illiquidly on the Ethereum beacon chain. For Terra, there was a centralized committee who deemed it appropriate to use a bunch of Luna tokens to purchase Bitcoin as hard collateral for the protocol. Again, there are very few mechanical similarities between the two protocols, or I don't want to call Celsius a protocol, between the two projects, but there is one thread that runs through it, which is both were centralized entities purporting to be decentralized in some way. A lot of the marketing copy that Celsius used was anti-bank, anti-Wall Street, pro-crypto, and while we can possibly never know this, it seems to have been designed to lead users to think it was actually fully decentralized.
And on that marketing copy, I know you took a lot of time to pull that actual copy and post it on your Twitter. So audience members, if you'd like to check out John's Twitter, again, it's at John Woo _ He's taken a lot of hours to pull the marketing copy and basically explain this situation to us. John, we're going to take a question after this, but I wanted to ask you before we take a question. A lot of investors, a lot of the people who put their money with Celsius, what they're wondering is, will I get that money back?
I think that question's impossible to know, Kathy. Number one, because it was so opaquely managed, we don't actually know the state of the liquid reserves of that company. And I'm not here to postulate on whether they exist or not. And it will be up to Celsius in their external communications, up to the courts if there are criminal or civil actions to determine that. Now, what I will say is there seems to be sufficient evidence that they have placed user deposits in highly illiquid investments, not necessarily poor investments, but illiquid investments that cannot be returned in their original state for some period of time. And so all indications seem to point to the fact that at least for some proportion of depositors, they will not necessarily receive what they put into the system in the short to medium term. And again, this is all conjecture on the part of the public, including myself, but much of the evidence points in.
So John, for someone on the sidelines right now watching, I've heard of people having millions of dollars and just basically freaking out right now. What do you suggest they do besides obviously getting the latest updates from people like yourself and others who are writing about this? What can they do at this point?
Unfortunately, my answer is nothing, which I know is cold comfort, and I really can't imagine the human toll of investors who have put a significant amount of their funds in Celsius. But Celsius was a centralized business. It was no different from giving funds to an asset manager or an investment manager. That investment manager decided to make certain investments on your behalf, those investments being in certain crypto instruments, and they were not fully transparent about which crypto instruments and how much liquidity they ultimately had to compensate retail investors and users. So as of now, we are very much at the whims of Celsius's decision making, just like if you had given $1 million to your investment manager and he had put it in certain stocks, you would be at his whims. It is fully custodial. And I think it's worth re-emphasizing that Celsius is not a decentralized finance protocol. And while it was built on top of decentralized finance, it is not indicative of the type of opaqueness that.
Right. And that's a very interesting point that while it was pitched as a decentralized mechanism, it is very centralized. And I think that's an important part of the points you made on Twitter as well. Let's take an audience question if you don't mind, John. Victoria, do we have questions from the audience?
We do not.
I'm going to, I think sometimes it's difficult to figure out the system to ask questions. So I'd like to ask a question for one of the audience members who had written into me. His name is Weston Nelson. He's a crypto trader and he's very, pretty well known, I think, in the Twitter sphere. Let me pull out his question for you. And Weston was trying to ask this directly, but he might have technical problems. Okay, John, here's Weston's question. Weston's question is, John, there have been thousands of transfers from Celsius to FTX in unusual amounts. What is happening here and why? Alameda, which is owned by Sam Bankman Fried, is likely involved as he was an investor in Voyager, a top competitor to Celsius. Do you think that SBF could be extorting Celsius somehow? Now, these are a lot of obviously reaching questions, and if you're not comfortable answering some of them, feel free. But Weston's general gist is that he wants to know about thousands of transfers that have been going from Celsius to FTX in unusual amounts because he's been actually analyzing the blockchain. What do you think of that? And if you can answer any of his other questions as well.
Sure. I mean, we're in the territory of wild conjecture here, so I really want to underscore a disclaimer that we're speaking purely in the realm of hypotheticals. I want to make sure we address that before we get into, what can be out of control allegations. Sending funds to FTX could be one of a number of things. One is simply sending funds off chain to a centralized exchange, FTX, where funds can then be dispersed. And so if you wanted, for instance, to liquidate an on-chain position, the natural next step would be to send it to FTX or another centralized exchange or another centralized custodian. That's oftentimes the exit ramp from on-chain activity. So I would say that that is the most innocent case in which you send funds to FTX. If you wanted to get more conspiratorial, and I don't personally believe this to be true, you could potentially explore some notion that FTX is purchasing distressed assets from Celsius at a discount in order to give them much needed emergency liquidity. And so let's say I was in a bunch of illiquid or distressed assets and I needed rapid liquidity to compensate withdrawals. I needed to compensate retail consumers. At this point, on-chain liquidity is quite thin. There aren't really many buyers for those assets. And potentially FTX is serving as a buyer of last resort. FTX is saying, we're going to buy some of the stuff that you have on your balance sheet, on your books, that you can't get rid of, you can't find a buyer for. You're going to give us a deal on those assets because we're the only people who will take it off your hands. Send it to us. We'll offer you much needed liquidity. That may be the case. I don't necessarily believe that too, but you could certainly tell that story.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. Now, wanted to ask you, John, so what's next? There are rumors of liquidity concerns at other firms as well. I've heard 3AC. I'm hearing others floating out in the market. I mean, what's next for the crypto world? The market has crashed after the Celsius news. So, and it's continuing to tumble with fears of who is going to basically drop next. So what are your thoughts on that?
I can't really speak to the causal factors for the crypto crash. And let's not forget, we're in a significant macro pressured environment where equities are in a bear market, where the general economy is faring extremely poorly, where we've had an over 8% inflation print, and inflation continues to rage for levels we haven't seen in 40 years. So the general global macro economy is not doing well, and crypto, being a risk asset in a rising interest rate environment, is unsurprisingly also doing very poorly. So it's hard for me to peer into the crystal ball and say what's coming for the future, but my personal belief is that crypto is very much going to be at the whims of the broader economy as a whole from this point going forward.
Okay. And I know on our Discord, which Weston Nelson was on, and he submitted a question, on our Discord, a lot of users are asking about, in terms of, has this turned into a crypto winter? Do you think that this can turn around, or are we in for a long crypto winter? And obviously you don't know this. This is speculation, but you're as much an expert as anyone out there in terms of being in the space for a long time and watching what's going on. Do you think we're in for a long crypto winter, or can we get out of this?
I think the thing that drives us out of the crypto bear market, whenever that happens, is the next wave of crypto innovation. And that includes things like Aztec Network, which is a zero knowledge based scaling solution for Ethereum. What that means is we offer privacy and scalability to the Ethereum network. We have many peers in the same space as us who are working on the same problem. But But frankly, if you look at what's happening in this current cycle, the pace of innovation has slowed. The number of new, interesting, and frankly, useful ideas has come to a crawl. In order for us to gain mass adoption, in order for us to access another bull market, we need to create technologies that improve privacy, reduce cost, and increase utility of blockchain networks. And quite frankly, I think the market is telling us right now that we're not quite there yet.
Okay, and I've heard that bear markets are good for building. Are you finding that that is true? And is that a positive side to any market turmoil going on, that people have a chance to sit back and regroup and rebuild like Aztec Network?
Yes, I would definitely echo that sentiment. Us at Aztec, we're much more focused. It's hard in a bull market to stay close to the fundamentals, to keep your eyes on the ball when all the numbers are going up. And in a bull market, lots of bad ideas get funded, right? And so during a bear market, it's very much a survivorship bias game. Anyone who can kind of stick it out will make it to the next bull market and hope to fight another day. The ones who don't have belief, don't have conviction, don't have the values alignment, and don't have funding and commitment are likely to leave the industry. And so, again, this is just a personal opinion, but I believe the bear market will ultimately be good for crypto long term.
Okay. What have I not asked you that you think is important about this Celsius meltdown, basically? You have done a lot of good research on this. You know a lot about what's going on. What do you think it's important people need to know at this point?
Nothing specific, but I do want to re-emphasize this notion that it really is not crypto unless you have self-sovereignty. That is one of the core values of original Bitcoiners. That is one of the core values of the Ethereum community. It is not crypto if you don't actually hold it on a hardware wallet, on your hot wallet. If you do not have self-custody, it is not crypto. You are merely handing funds to someone else and trusting that they are doing right by you. This is a perfect example of what happens when you trust somebody else with your crypto holdings. I'm not saying that every single centralized custodian on earth is malicious or nefarious or is going to run away with your money. But it is a good reminder to all of us that if we don't self-custody, if we don't have self-sovereignty over our funds, if we don't have financial autonomy, then we really haven't improved anything about the world.
John Wu, thank you so much for your time today. John Wu is growth at Aztec Network. Find him at John Wu _ on Twitter. He has a 40 IQ newsletter that you should follow as well. And you can follow Aztec Network at Aztec Network on Twitter as well. Thank you so much for your time today, John. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kathy.